Welcome, everyone, to today's special webinar, Post-Assad Syria, Shaping the Region's New Reality. I'm Dr. Stephen Sussman, Professor of Public Administration at Barry University's Andreas School of Business and Public Administration in Miami and co-founder of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research. My colleague, Dr. Luis Fleischman, and I, together with a dedicated team, founded this center as a dynamic forum for free exchange of ideas, serving as a hub for meaningful and informed dialogue. We address critical challenges of our times. Beyond being a think tank, we are a collaborative community of scholars, experts, and stakeholders dedicated to developing balanced and practical solutions to today's pressing issues. At the heart of our mission are three core values. Diversity. We believe that welcoming diverse voices and perspectives is key to meaningful debate. Balance. Our platform prioritizes thoughtful, inclusive dialogue over partisan divides. Community. We aim to bring people together, academics, professionals, decision makers, and civil society leaders, to share ideas and create impactful change. You can explore our work, including recordings of past webinars and published articles, on our website at palmbeachdemocracy.org. While you're there, consider supporting us. As a 501c3 nonprofit, your generous contributions enable us to continue our work, including hosting timely and impactful programs like this one. Now on to today's program. We're honored to have the co-founder, Dr. Luis Fleischman, as our moderator, a renowned expert in Middle East affairs and author of The Middle East Riddle, a study of Middle East peace process and Israeli-Arab relations in changing times. Luis also contributed a chapter on democracy in the Arab world to a forthcoming book titled The Constantly Reshaping Social Identities in the Middle East, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, co-edited by our distinguished panelist, Dr. Gadi Hitman. Luis brings insight to today's discussion, certainly very unparalleled insight into today's discussion. We encourage your participation. Submit your questions through the chat box or use the virtual hand emoji when we open the floor for questions. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Luis, who will introduce our distinguished panelists, Dr. Josef Olmert, Dr. Robert Rabil, and Dr. Gadi Hitman. Luis, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those who are actually in the Middle East right now, wherever you are. We again have another program here that is very important and very current. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Olmert for urging us to have this program immediately after it was clear that the Assad regime was about to collapse. We have all been surprised by the quick collapse of the Syrian regime, which reminded us of the collapse of the Afghan government at the hands of the Taliban. So the question is, what is the implication of all this? You know, what is going to be in the future? I mean, what's going to happen? And this is why we are having this wonderful panel this afternoon, this evening. First of all, before I introduce the speakers, let me set up the rules. Each speaker is going to speak for between 10 to 12 minutes, okay? And I'm going to control it. So make sure that you meet the timeline. Then I will ask a few questions of my own, and then I will open it up to the audience for questions, okay? The audience can ask the questions by raising their hand and speaking up, or by placing your questions in the chat. So now the speakers. First of all, the first speaker is going to be Dr. Josef Olmert. Dr. Olmert is a retired professor of Middle East Studies from the University of South Carolina. For over 4 decades, he dealt with Syrian affairs. And as a professor in various universities and as an advisor to the Israeli government, and he was also, a professor in various universities and an advisor to the Israeli government, and also peace negotiator with Syria after the Madrid conference. The second speaker is going to be Dr. Robert Rabil. Robert Rabil is a professor of political science and Middle East at Florida Atlantic University. His area of research includes political Islam, terrorism, transnational and revivalist movements, US-Arab relations, Arab-Israeli conflict, reform in the Arab world, contemporary refugees in the Middle East, and in general, contemporary Middle Eastern and Southeastern politics. He's the author of 8 books. His articles have appeared in major newspapers and academic journals, okay, including some outstanding academic journals. I don't have time to list them right now. He also contributed a number of chapters in different books that discuss political Islam and Middle Eastern politics. He has a PhD in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies from Brandeis University. And he also served as chief of emergency of the Red Cross in Lebanon's Baabda district during the country's civil war. And he served as the project manager of the US State Department-funded Iraq Research and Documentation Project. Finally, Dr. Gadi Hitman is a senior lecturer, faculty member, and the chair of Middle East Department and Political Science at Ariel University. He is the author of 5 books and nearly 40 articles on topics related to Israel, the Gulf state regions, consequences of the regional turmoil in the Middle East, and theoretical empirical aspects of nationalism, ethnicity, political protest, or violence. He holds a PhD in political science from Bar-Ilan University. And as Dr. Sussman actually pointed out, I mean, today we have the new book that you co-edited, correct, Gadi? And hopefully it will be available in Amazon. I saw the price in sterling. I don't know what is going to be the price in the United States. I have no clue, but it's definitely in Amazon. So without further ado, Dr. Olmert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And as usual, I open with greetings to our good friends, Steven Sussman and Louis Fleischman, for establishing the center, initiating the programs, and accepting even my request to cut short completely my biography in the introduction so that we shall have more time to talk, and I will therefore gain 2 more minutes. So guys, look, I joked already in one of my previous Facebook posts about the fact that all my academic career, I've had at least one member of the Assad family is the center of my interest in Syria. For so many years, it was Hafez Assad and then Bashar Assad. I almost felt like a member of the family there. And I think that often even Gadi, as my former student, may remember that in the 1980s, whenever there were reports about Assad's health condition, everybody used to ask me on Israeli television radio, so when is he going to die? I said, look, when he's dying, I will tell you that he died. You know, that's something that you cannot predict. But I did predict, and I have to say, the downfall of Bashar Assad, and I say it because so many people did not. I published an article through the Palm Beach Center in 2019, in which I said, contrary to conventional wisdom at that time, that Bashar Assad did not win the civil war in Syria. So therefore, it's not like Monday morning quarterbacking for me to say today that I predicted it. I did. But why? What happened in Syria? And I would like to give a context which goes beyond specific events right now. I'll come to them later on. What happens in Syria now is that, yet again, the Syrian state failed to maintain a stable political system, even though the current one was for so many years, it was not as stable as people made it up to be, because there was a civil war already in 1976 until 1982, in which tens of thousands of people were massacred, and you don't have stability when you massacre so many people. You can gain it for some time. Also, the years of Bashar Assad were not as stable. The Kurds revolted in 2004, for example. Not so much was known about that, and so on and so forth. Throughout the history of modern Syria, there were all the time attempts at creating a political community that would exist itself in order to put together all these ethnic and religious communities in Syria. So it failed. Parliamentary democracy from 1946 to 49 failed, and came the coup d'etat of the 1949 year, and then the Shishaki dictatorship. Then there was in 1958 to 1961 the attempted union with Egypt, which was another indication of the failure of the Syrian state as a political community. Then came the neo-Ba'ath between 1963 to 1970. It failed. Assad came with another type of Ba'ath regime. And now, after all those years, come the time of the Islamist. And this is always, an alternative in the Middle East, because as we know, I mean, as they say in Arabic, Islamul Hal, Islam is the solution, and the sense is that now we have to try this solution to the problems of Syria. So it's yet another attempt to create a real viable political community, which remains to be seen what will be the case of it. I'll come to that later, but put it in this perspective, that Syria really is a failing political experiment. In a way, like Lebanon, maybe like Iraq. People would say that also Jordan is artificial, but as of now, at least Jordan maintained much more stability than any other Arab country in the Middle East. I mean, the same dynasty, 3 kings only 100 years. So that's, in a way, stability. So the real problem is how to create a legitimate system in a country in which there is no democratic tradition, in which the sectarian relationships have been impacted by centuries of history, of hatred, of discrimination, of persecution, and all that comes with it. So from an historic perspective, this is really what happens in Syria. Another attempt at creating a Syrian stable state failed. Let's see what happens now is the Islamists, if indeed, which is a big if, they will stay in power. We may come to that later on also in questions and maybe in the overall discussion. Now, some people say that this is the total failure of the idea that there could be any kind of a nationalist secular system in the Arab world, as opposed to the rise of Islamic forces. It may seem like that, but Pan-Arabism died already many, many years ago. We all remember the famous article of our good friend from Lebanon that died a few years ago, that basically talked about the death of Pan-Arabism, and that's an old situation. So it's not really a new phenomenon.
Fuad Ajami,
a good friend or a personal friend, I'm sure that Robert Rabil knew him personal. Did you know that, Robert? Did you know Fuad? Oh, Robert doesn't. So there's nothing new about that. And I don't think that the downfall of this current regime in Syria is the indication that we see another example of Arab nationalism in retreat as opposed to the rise of Islam. That's already a process that started way back, And basically what's left of Arab nationalism is not even the Arab-Israeli conflict, because one can argue that the conflict is mostly part of the Arab world and the Palestinians against Israel, and much more so Muslim countries like Iran on the one hand and Turkey on the other end. So Arab nationalism lost way back. Now, whether Islamism is winning remains to be seen. In 2012, we saw that the Muslim Brotherhood are taking over Egypt after the rise of them in the elections that happened after the downfall of Mubarak, and who knows what is going to happen. Then the Egyptian army a year later gave you the answer. They took over. So all these predictions about Islamism winning because they took over in Egypt failed to materialize. And I would therefore call attention also to the fact that we just see the beginning of something in Syria that is associated with Islamism, but remains to be seen. I'm not at all sure that we shall see those guys too much ahead of time, and remains to be seen. We may have more programs in the Palm Beach Center, so we shall be able to know more about it and talk about it. Now, the last point that I want to raise in this initial presentation, it is the question, of course, of Israeli policy about all that. I need to say that the activities of the Israeli government in terms of dealing with the Syrian situation in the last few days or couple of weeks or so were by definition much more convincing and resounding and effective than the way the wars were conducted in Gaza and in Lebanon. I need to say that. And I don't always give compliments to a government led by Netanyahu. Those who know me know that this is not exactly my forte, but I need to say it. And I think that what Israel did by basically destroying most of the Syrian capabilities or what's left of them in order to prevent them from falling to the hands of the rebels was indeed the right way to handle it. And if you want an historic perspective, let's go to the example of Winston Spencer Churchill. On the 3rd of July, 1940, the British Navy destroyed the French Navy in Algeria after the collapse of France and the ceasefire agreement with Germany in order to prevent this Navy from being used by the Nazis. And that's exactly what we did in Syria and did the right thing in Syria. And all those who condemn Israel for that are hypocrites, of course. And, you know, who cares in a way? And it goes on. I just read today that maybe they did not destroy completely the Syrian Navy in Tartus because there were some Russian ships still around the place and they were in some kind of a tacit agreement with the Russians not to endanger the Russians' presence there because some of the Syrian ships were in between Russian ships in the port. But that is a minute detail. Now, the question really is what Israel should do in the future. And one thing that Israel should do is, and I would say it without any hesitation, Israel should continue what has already started to prevent by force any attempt by hostile elements to base themselves again in Syria. And that mainly means the Iranians, if they will try again to do something in Syria, I doubt it, but if. What we shall have to do is not to interfere in Syrian affairs beyond a certain territory that we should consider as most vital to our interests. And this is, of course, the southern part of Syria, mostly, not exclusively, but mostly inhabited by our Druze friends. There already are some interesting signs of discord, which is positive among Druze in South Syria. There are videos of assemblies of Druze in some villages calling upon their leaders to ask to be annexed to Israel. I saw this morning that there were some denials to that from other Druze groups, but this is the immediate interest of Israel, which, by the way, is also the interest of the Kingdom of Jordan. Never mind what the Jordanians are saying today about what Israel is doing in Syria, because this is the area which is bordering with both Israel and Jordan. I do not anticipate, and I'll be a little bit different here than some commentators, I do not anticipate a possibility of a direct confrontation between Israel and Turkey as a result of what is happening in Syria now. I'm not one of those who think that this is an unqualified, great historic victory for Mr. Erdogan. It may look like this, but there are all kinds of issues concerning Syrian-Turkish relations that would occupy and preoccupy the Turks if they really want to be a dominant force in the new Syria. Clearly, the Turks will be very dominant in between the border all the way to the Aleppo area and beyond that, but I'm not sure that it is going to be beyond these boundaries as I described them. I don't think that the Syrians would like to be happy to replace semi-Iranian domination with Turkish domination. There are all kinds of factors here at play. I don't want to get into all those details, but I would say that, yes, we have to pay attention to what Erdogan is doing. We have to be on alert. We have to be very watchful. But I want to make my last point about the failure of intelligence in predicting what happened in Syria. And I will not spare words also about the failure of Israeli intelligence. Let's be honest about that. Israelis like to say that in the Western world, people don't understand the Middle East, but we Israelis understand. Let's be honest about that. Throughout the years, and I say something now out of personal knowledge and experience, and I would not advise anyone to ask me for more details about that. Whenever Israeli governments wanted to deal with Syria about peace between the two countries, they tended not to be so serious about the possibility that this regime in Syria is not legitimate and is not going to stay forever. This consideration was not the main consideration for Israeli governments when they wanted to make peace with Syria. And this has been always a big, big problem and mistake. And it wasn't just the government, it was the intelligence community, and it was most of the academic community. I'll be happy to hear later on from Gadi what he thinks about this particular point that I make now. But I know out of personal knowledge. And the reason that I mention it is significant.
Your time
because
is up.
the fact that we did not take the domestic situation in Syria into main consideration until 2011, because then the civil war started, so of course we couldn't ignore it anymore. The fact that we did not take it into account reflected a very fundamental misunderstanding of politics in a neighboring Arab country that we should have known and understood much better.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Yossi.
we always, that's my very last line, and we also in Israel made as our main concern and interest and priority maintaining stability on the expense of other factors. And stability proved to be artificial in the case of Mubarak, in the case of Gaddafi, and now in the case of Syria. And we have to bear this in mind also when we are considering what may be or not, but could be the future in the neighboring kingdom of Jordan. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Yossi, thank you so much. And I will add that I remember since I was in the Golan Heights with the IDF, the idea, the conception, the conceptia was that, you know, with Assad is a good partner for peace because they have, because he maintained what is called the ceasefire since 1974. In any event, and so they believe that he's a good partner and let's stick to him. So I am 100% with you on that. Now our next speaker is Dr. Robert Rabil. Dr. Rabil, the floor is yours. You have 12 minutes.
Thank you, and always it's a pleasure to be with you all. Listen, what happened really, it hasn't sank really deeply in my mind, because what happened so swift. In 8 days, really, Syria was gone. That regime that stayed in power for 53 years, that regime that put people in prison for 40 years, that regime that harassed Lebanon and killed many people, including some of my family. And really, I couldn't just, fathom what happened. And I'll tell you this, whatever I hear now, and still, I'm kind of digesting and ingesting, what happened. But I'll tell you a few things, the images that come to my mind now, because I have more concerns now. Also, I am happy, but I have a lot of concern. The first concern, when I was serving at the Red Cross, and I still remember, I don't know if Joseph remember, I was at Gallery Sim'an, mainly in Hazmini, and you had the Lebanese army, the Israeli army, and the Lebanese Christian.
I was there, I know, yeah.
Yeah, and I used to coordinate. And I still remember when the PLO was expelled from Lebanon. Celebration like no others, especially among the Christians. It's a new day, Bashir Ismail president. And all of a sudden, in 3 weeks, after the election of Gemayel, Gemayel was defeated. You had Sabra and Shatila massacre, and the Israelis started to withdraw to the Awali River. Why I mention that, as a matter of fact, because I look at the celebration, what happened then, and I say today you have a celebration, but today is different. You know why it's different? Because Syria is no longer there. And this is something, as a matter of fact, you have no idea how important it is that the people of the Middle East, that the people of Lebanon, people of Syria, and the Israeli as well, and Jordanian. Now, more so here from this point, what happened was really unbelievable. The second point, I am happy, as a matter of fact, because he mentioned Yossi and he say Israel and stability. And this also bring an image to me. I did my dissertation at the Dayan Center, and I stayed as a research fellow, Truman Institute and the Dayan Center in Israel. And when I was at the Dayan Center at Tel Aviv, I used to speak mainly Rabinovich and some general there. And I used to ask, why you want to do peace with this madman, with this tyrannical figure? And mainly the general would tell me, and really openly told me, Robert, stability, stability, stability. Now, given back what I thought then and what I said today, I think that indeed Israel has changed its view. And this change, as a matter of fact, happened by a recent article, which I fully agree with, by Amos Yadlin, when he said, something, we always said we should stay with the devil we know. Well, it's about time, we have to go and see the devils that we don't know. And as a matter of fact, let me put, and I mentioned that to Lewis, and I put a picture myself, and I put it on social media when I saw all this celebration and what's happening. And I said, listen, you thanked everybody. There is one country really at the heart of it you have to thank, and that's Israel. If it wasn't for Israel, whether intentionally, Joseph, or not intentionally, what Israel has done really, it's unbelievable. Israel first has removed the PLO in Lebanon, but with Syria there, mainly now you have another party, mainly worse than the PLO, Hezbollah. But Israel, as a matter of fact, in this war, it clipped the wing of Hezbollah, and little by little, or steady, it hit the Syrian regime. It hit the Iranian in Syria. You know what I mean? And of course, it hit the Iranians, it hit, the ballistic missiles and all kinds of surface-to-air missiles. So mainly, yes, Israel, as I mentioned, intentionally, is the one indeed that paved the way to what happened. Now, the problem is what's happening now. You have celebration indeed. In Lebanon, they are celebrating. In Syria, they are celebrating. And other countries are celebrating, as a matter of fact, especially the Syrians who live in different parts. But now what's next? Next to me is uncertainty. Next to me, I know one thing probably, and this is something Bashir Gemayel said, whoever is gonna come after this regime is not gonna be worse than the Assad regime. This is really the way I felt about it early on in my life, and really I was active myself since I was 13 years old. I started this when I joined the Red Cross in Lebanon. Now, my concern is that now today, and let me tell you what I see today. What I see today, I'm very upset that you have certain mukhabarat, mainly intelligence, and Syrian figures. They fled to Beirut, and some of them are in Beirut, and the army now is talking to them to leave. I am upset that some of Hezbollah members spoke with the Lebanese army, with the general, with the commander, and I told them, listen, or yes, we are going to tell you, and you know already where our weapons are, but we want you to let us keep some weapon on the side. And I can share this with you, and this is very, mainly it's not known yet. The head of the army or the commander-in-chief said, no, I want to stick to the points of the agreement that was signed between Israel, United States, and Lebanon. Now, here again, this is mainly my question about Lebanon is what the Syrians are going to do in Lebanon. What are the Lebanese government going to do? And when I mention the Lebanese government, not the army, what I worry about the most is the corrupt leaders of Lebanon. Really, I don't know what they are going to do. I worry about, for example, certain people bringing bombs into Lebanon, which I saw happen before, including by Christian and Muslims. And these people were part of the government of Lebanon. So I worry about that. I worry about, for example, you have messages. They are telling the Alawi in Tripoli to move to Jabal Amel, mainly to move to the south. So really, again, this I worry about. This is about Lebanon. Now I go to Syria. I worry. Why I worry? I worry when I look and I say, okay, let me take a look and see what the leader of HTS, of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the main rebel who really did that campaign and was really successful. And if you look, yes, his statements were moderate. His actions were moderate. But now look now what he's doing. He unilaterally, as a matter of fact, appointed someone who was again his colleague, who was in Idlib, Muhammad al-Bashir, and he put him as the head of the transitional government. And why I mention that? He did it without consulting with the other opposition groups. So here, of course, I say, all right, this guy was at one time Al-Qaeda. He rebranded himself, and now he's rebranding himself. And I ask this question, does the Tigers gonna, lose its stripes And this is where one of my concern one. The second concern was happening with the Kurds. What's happening with the Kurds, as a matter of fact, United States came and told the Kurds withdraw from Manbij. Manbij is a very important area in the north, and we told them, as a matter of fact, withdraw. And recently again, I was surprised when I saw Syrians demonstrating against the Kurds in an area called Deir ez-Zor, and the Kurds withdrew. And of course, you have statement here and here about the Kurds. So I don't know what's going to happen between the Kurds and HTS especially. And more so, let me put it more specifically. When we speak about this rebel leader and this movement, the HTS, but also if he says something, are going to take what he says really as a fait accompli, mainly as something that's going to happen? Why I mention that? Because this Salafi jihadi group has other coalition partner who, if he says something, I don't know if the others are going to say it or they are going to approve or disagree with it. So this is where the uncertainty that I have. Now, here mentioned about Turkey. Turkey, as a matter of fact, is going to have issues with HTS or with the rebel. Why? Because early on when he was governing the Idlib province, he kind of, at first Turkey failed to control him, but then they work together. And today, I don't think if Erdogan thinks he is going to be able to control the HTS leader, mainly Al-Julani, he is mistaken. But I say this to Turkey. Turkey might not do as Iran did, but Turkey will have political power in Syria. And Turkey today has more leverage than Iran and Hezbollah and Russia. And this is a huge, as a matter of fact, where the axis of resistance, and please don't lose sight, this axis of resistance, this ring of fire, this ring of fire that mainly spoke about Israel as a spider web. It turned out to be they are the spider web, and the axis of resistance has fallen. Syria is too important historically. Listen, the Umayyad dynasty, the first dynasty of the Arab world, had its capital at Damascus. This is how important. And this has all collapsed. The question now, next what? For Israel now, I was happy, and I mentioned, intentionally or unintentionally, mainly what they did really paved the way of what happened. And I hope that, they will take certain actions. I will say, something, and here let me put it this way. I hope that will straddle the ground between stability and between doing certain things to improve their security and the security of Lebanon and Jordan especially. This is what I would like to see myself. Having said that, I am still worried. I'm really worried. I am worried about the Shia, what they are going to do. I am worried about Iraq, what it's going to do. And I am worried, again, about certain unilateral action. And I saw certain, they sent me from Syria and from Lebanon today, as a matter of fact. I was going to put it on Facebook, and I said, no. Mainly you are now have the Julani people, HDS, are taking unilateral action, and they are killing some of Al-Assad's follower, or Al-Assad, what they call Al-Shabiha, mainly, or the thugs of Assad. Here's something I know myself because I was too much involved in Iraq. Really, you cannot build a country, really, if you are going to take these actions. And I still remember when they went, the Iraqi, and executed Saddam Hussein. Really, you need the court. I know they are bad. I know they are terrible. But really, this is what you need. You need the court. You want to execute them, let the court do that. So I am worried about now what kind of a government. I am worried that what the HDS is going to say, the others are not going to agree to it. And I am worried about how the international community, they are going to go and deal with mainly this rebel leader. And again, I worry about the Lebanese government, and especially with certain figures of the previous regime. These are my worries. So on the one hand, I am very happy what happened. I feel what happened is an earthquake, really, that we haven't seen in 53 years. 53 years, we haven't seen that. And as I am celebrating and happy, as I am worried. And I don't have the answers now. Why? Because I want to see action speak more than words, and we are going to see what he's going to do next. And from there, we'll glean, how Syria is going to move forward. And I thank you.
Robert, thank you so much. This is really enlightening. Only I have one question for you right now, because you went over the head of the transitional government, Bashir, and you went very quickly. What is
Okay.
unique about that appointment that actually calls your attention or worries you?
All right.
Just
Okay.
quickly,
All right.
quickly, just half a minute.
Yes. Listen, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in order to become Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it brought other Salafi jihadi. You know what I mean?
Big coalition.
And Salafi jihadi, and those Salafi jihadi groups, he and him with Jolani, they appointed al-Bashir as the head of it. Mainly they had what they call the Salvation Government.
Yeah.
Now, when he is in Syria, the point is he took a unilateral decision without speaking with the Syrian opposition, not only the jihadi, but you have other opposition as well. Really, you have a good number of them. The intellectual, those who fought with the Syrian army and defected. He took unilateral decision, Luis. And
Okay, so your point is that you are concerned about the process, not so much about the identity of the man.
Well, I am concerned about his ideology, but also what he took today, what kind of a decision he took today. It doesn't translate well in the future because he's taking unilateral action. You cannot take unilateral action if you are in the opposition. I've seen that in Iraq.
Correct.
I've seen that in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Really, we are part of that world. So really, this is where, you know, I am extremely worried.
Okay, thank you so much. And he probably learned from Angela Merkel. That's a joke, by the way. In any event, Gadi, you are next.
I'm going to give Gadi.
No, I can do it without the presentation
Okay.
after listening to
Yeah,
Yossi.
give him the just in case.
After listening to it's an advantage. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I won't take more than 10 minutes. And the fact that I'm the last speaker of the panelist in this case is an advantage because I don't want to repeat what Yossi and Robert just said. So if I may, I try to focus only on Syria and see try to map some huge challenges that the new regime in Syria, never mind who will be the president, the prime minister, and whatsoever, has in the short and in the long run. The first thing that I want to speak about is identity, and it goes back to what Yossi said earlier. Syria basically is a collection of people that historically nothing put them in common. In fact, the fact that they are living in the same territory. Even the words, the big Syria, greater Syria, or Syria, it's only a phrase. Yossi mentioned the fact that Pan-Arabism has died so many years ago, and he mentioned the late Fuad Ajami. I published this year a paper with my co-author Dana O, explaining framing by framing why Pan-Arabism was just a utopia, no more than that. So the first question that Abu Muhammad Jolani or anybody else, or Bashir, or whatever whoever will be the president in Syria is, what kind of identity of a state we want to see in Syria?
Exactly.
Do we want to see a religious state, a liberal state, a communist state, a socialist state? So the fact, just to recall our audience, because I am under the impression that all the people here in the Zoom this evening has so many knowledge about Syria, so I don't want to repeat myself, is that in June 12/11, only 3 months after the civil war in Syria has begun, more than 80 representatives of 80 different opposition groups to Assad were met in Istanbul, failed to reach in any sort of agreement what will be the day after Bashar is toppling. So now, as Robert said, on the one hand, everybody is so happy that there is no Bashar Assad anymore, and on the other hand, nobody knows what will be the day after Bashar. So the question of identity is a huge challenge. And according to the last reports coming from Syria, let's say from Wednesday, Thursday, and even today, on the one hand, Jolani is trying to marketing himself or branding himself as a very moderate person to the world. On the other end, they've already said that they will hunt the supporters of the previous regime, and the fact that all the senior families in Latakia signed 3 days ago a petition that they are willing to cooperate with the new government, except the families of Assad and Makhlouf. That's of course not surprising. That means that they are predicting that those Salafi jihad movements will eventually arrive at Latakia and elsewhere to revenge. And if we are going to see some revenge activities in Syria, so the future is not so pink. So the question of his identity is the first point that I want to make here to the audience. Second issue that is very important is the refugees. We're now hearing about so many refugees that fled from Syria over the last 13 years that they want to come back to Syria. Some of them have no place to go back home. Others who wants to go back to Damascus basically cannot do it because their apartments were populated by Shiite who Iran sent during the last decade to Damascus. Now the new regime in Syria published today an official statement saying that 700,000 Iranians who got Syrian citizenship from Assad during the last years, this citizen is expanded on Sunday morning, in 2 days from now. So when if those refugees are back in Damascus and those Iranian Shiites are not willing to evacuate their houses, they will slaughter each other. So the refugee is a huge problem, and that takes you to the third point, which is economy. Syria is in a very poor economic condition. We saw the pictures of the towns and the cities and the military posts, not only in the Julan, but also in Syria itself. And they need billions of dollars to rehabilitate the state. Who will do it? Who will fund all this assistance to Syrians? And this is much more multiple in numbers than what we see in Gaza, because look at the difference of the sizes between Gaza and Syria. And that takes me to the last 2 points that I want to make here for the start of this discussion, and I know that some questions will come later. The question of regional diplomacy for the new regime in Syria is critical, because it's not only the fact that probably Turkey will have more power or more leverage in Syria in the future, but if they are looking to have any kind of assistance from Gulf states or other Arab prominent countries, they will have to maneuver between different interests. And you cannot make Erdogan angry when you don't have the power to resist the Turkish army. So regional diplomacy is a very delicate issue here, not only because you don't want to get the Syrians are not looking to be again in any military confront with the neighbors, but also because the fact that they will need the money, the regional money, to rehabilitate themselves. And lastly, of course, is the international arena. Trump is going to be back in the White House in mid-January. He said last week that before Assad was toppled, that we are not going to do anything in Syria because the Syrians are not our friends. And if the new regime in Syria is looking for a new international power to support him, the question is, who will do it if not the United States of America? And I have no clue what President Trump is going to do. And if I think about Russia, you cannot trust the Russians anymore. And I don't see France is getting back again to support the Syrians. So now, if you want somebody in the international community to support you, to have some money from the international monetary funds, from the UN agencies, and so on, you need somebody to work with him. And if you are presenting a Salafi jihadi agenda, your odds to do it is falling down. So these are, in short, 5 huge challenges that the new regime in Syria will have to face in the future. And unlike Robert and Yossi, I didn't say a word about Israel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
I don't
thank
know.
you
I mean,
so
you could have,
much.
you should have said something about Israel. Maybe Israel should help Syria economically. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
it's a joke, but why not? I mean, at least we can help the Druze in the south,
If I have another 30 seconds, Louis, I can say this.
Yes, 30 seconds.
I think that Yossi is right by saying that Israel, for a change, is doing right in Syria. But the
For a
question
change.
is
What you
not.
say?
No, not Yossi said something right in change. Israel, as a government, for a change, is doing something right in Syria, comparing to its policy in Lebanon and Gaza. Now, look at the funny word. We have so many opposition groups in Syria, and we have no clue who is going to rule in Syria and what will be the characteristic of the new regime in Syria in the day after Bashar. And we have nothing or no one that we can rely on in Gaza. And that's pretty funny. But Israel is doing right in Syria, but trying to reduce or destroy the military capabilities of the Syrian army. But that's not enough. That's not enough. It's not enough to destroy your enemy militarily. It's much more important to have a diplomatic political policy. What would you like to see for the benefits of Israel in Syria in the day after Bashar? And I hope, I don't know, but I hope that the Israeli government now is doing something about it. That's the time that's the time to reshape a new policy in Syria.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I was going to ask the first question to the three of you, because you indeed identified a multiplicity of groups in Syria, and it looks like they are now in a sort of ad hoc alliance to topple the old regime, and they indeed succeeded in toppling the old regime. You even talk about refugees coming back and having to fight against the Shiites that were occupying their houses. And of course, basically, you expect more conflicts, a sort of a civil war after the liberation, as it happened in other countries, including in the United States. There was a civil war 100 years after the independence, of course, different than this one. But we always saw a civil war, even in my own country, Uruguay. There was a civil war immediately after gaining independence in the early 19th century. Now, here is where I'm going. President-elect Donald Trump, which is now de facto already a president, said he does not want to be involved in Syria. And of course, we are seeing the Russians trying to connect with THS. And Turkey, of course, is trying to also have influence. Now, do you think the Trump administration is going to abandon the courts? Do you think that the United States can afford to be indifferent to developments in Syria, given the current situation? Because what I see is if the jihadists actually don't take full control of Syria, what is going to happen is probably a situation of anarchy. And when there is anarchy, you have a lot of foreign intervention, which basically requires some action on the part of the United States, and to be honest, maybe also on the part of Israel as well. So that's my question for the three of you. Yossi, I don't know where you want to answer that question first.
You asked
and then...
your questions in one question because you talked about Trump and Israel. It's not necessarily the same. Look.
No, I'm trying just to save time.
No,
Okay.
Look, if the HTS, as Robert explained, the HTS is a coalition of God knows how many organizations. During the height of the civil war in Syria, I counted over 200 different organizations. You'll be surprised. I mean, and they represent a multiplicity of local, regional, God knows what interests and all that. And we are not sure that they are really in control of everything in Syria. And they're definitely not in control of the Kurds, not in control of the Druze. They haven't yet entered the core of the Alawi territory. Let's see what will happen if they try to do that, and so on and so forth. So we'll see. But look, Trump has to decide about the Kurds in Syria as part of an overall evaluation of his overall foreign policy. Is he going to be isolationist or is he going to be something else? Because he already betrayed the Kurds in Iraq in 2017 during the...
And in Syria as well.
In Syria.
Yeah, no, I'm about to say. And
Mhm.
did it in Syria already once, and if he is going to do it again, it's only because he would prefer the Turks over the Kurds, as has been historically the tragedy of the Kurds throughout their modern history. And you know what the Kurds say, the mountain is our best ally, but the mountains are no more the type of barrier that they used to be in the old days, you know, so it's like a metaphor, but it doesn't work anymore in reality. And I don't know, Luis, I honestly don't know what Trump will do. I'm not sure that Trump knows what he will do. I mean, I've never been a Trumpist. I'm appreciating his foreign policy when it comes to Israel, or at least what it used to be. But when it came to Syria and Iraq, he hasn't done anything good, you know. And the fact that he took credit for the demolition of ISIS at that time, he took credit he didn't deserve. He did not deserve this credit. But to end up, you know, and to leave time to others, I don't want to take time from others, but to end up, look, it's not just the Kurds. And Gadi raised a great point about the rehabilitation or reconstruction of Syria and all that. America is not going to invest money in Syria. Israel cannot do that and should not do that unless it is around the southern enclave of the Druze and so on and so forth. The Gulf states will not do anything that will enhance the influence of Erdogan. And Erdogan himself doesn't have the funds to do that, let alone the Russians and others. So therefore, what we can anticipate almost with certainty is the word chaos. And there will be a chaos. Wait and see. And by the way, I've seen that Gadi reached this report. They already started executions in various parts of Syria, including Alawis and others. And
Yeah, they did.
yeah, that's how it starts, and it will continue and increase.
They are formal executions, or they are just spontaneous expressions of anger?
I don't understand what is formal or spontaneous executions. And
executions means the government orders the execution.
But I don't know if there is a government. Robert was absolutely right about that. There is no government. And, you know, I saw terrible videos, including in an hospital, executions, people shoot and kill other people. Who ordered them to do so? I don't know if anyone ordered them.
All right.
No,
Robert,
nobody
you want to
ordered
relate to
Luis.
that question?
Yeah,
Luis, nobody. No, okay, sorry, Robert, please.
No,
Yeah,
no,
Robert,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Gadi.
Nobody ordered the rebels to bury the Assad's father's grave. You don't need to order them. There's so much hatred there. So that's what I said
These are riots.
My short presentation. If they want to revenge, and I always say to my students that historians are very good in predicting the past. Yeah. And if in the Middle East is specifically more than any other region in the world, is a place that people living the past more than the present and the future. And if they want to revenge after what they have been through since 1971, they will do it. And this means chaos. Now, Yossi said something about Trump, and I want to elaborate another just to mention our audience here. When Trump was elected in 2016, the first station in the Middle East he arrived was Saudi Arabia, and they signed a mutual contract, nearly $400 billion. But 2 years later, when the Iranian attacked Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia, Trump did nothing to support the Saudis. And we are talking about the Saudis. We are not talking about the Kurds. And we are not talking about the Turks, which means that is unpredictable. And I'm not sure, as Yossi said, that he knows what he's going to do. And if this is the situation, the probability of chaos in Syria is pretty high.
Oh, good, very good point. You refer, by the way, to the attack that Iranians carried out against Aramco a few years ago.
Yeah, in 2019.
And basically,
and
the
Trump
administration
did
didn't do
nothing.
anything.
Trump did nothing to support the Saudis, and that by the way, this was a turning point for the Saudis who turned their back to Trump and went to the Chinese.
That's correct. That's
And
correct.
the rebels in Syria may go to China as well. Maybe China will help them. I don't know.
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Gadi.
you.
Yeah.
Well, I broadly speaking agree with Gadi, but let me tell you this: what's happening. The Republican Party and those close to Trump, they are debating the issue now. And I know some Israelis and some Jewish leaders, they are debating the issue now as we speak today.
Yeah.
And I know also that Erdogan and Trump, they have some kind of relationship. And indeed, as Yossi say, you know, I think that he probably preferred the Turks over the Kurds. But still now, you know, the issue now, what they are saying, those who are debating, you don't need to go ahead and be involved militarily in Syria.
Correct.
We have a strong presence, not only in Jordan now. We have a strong, in Israel. We have a strong presence also in Jordan. Let's not forget that. We don't have only Al-Tanf on the border. If you go a few miles inside Jordan, we have our biggest station. We have our jets there. We are worried about Jordan, but also this is directed toward Israel and Syria. So mainly my point is that true that I believe Trump's impulse not to be involved, but he could be swayed by the people around them that the U.S. involvement is not going to be costly, and he will speak with Turkey and will speak with Saudi Arabia, and you will have some involvement. Now, of course, the first thing you have to discuss now, whether United States is going to speak with Julani in the first place. Why? Because he's still designated as a terrorist. And how are you going to speak with a terrorist if you don't remove that designation on him? So it's very important. Another couple of things that was mentioned by Yossi and Gadi, I would like to mention regarding Iran and the refugees. The refugees, you have to understand something now what's happening in Syria. You have many Syrians in Lebanon going to Syria, and you have a good number of Christians, even Alawi, going to Lebanon, and Shia going to Lebanon. So you have some transfer. Another thing also about Iran, and I don't think that this is, of course, it could happen, but I think the possibility of happening is somehow slim, mainly less than 50%, where the Iranians, they are mainly the Shia, whose citizenship have been revoked, and Gadi mentioned it, they are going to go and have a fight. Why? Because if you look at the statement today at the Iranian president, they are all, as a matter of fact, mainly we have to make some kind of a modus operandi, some kind of a detente with the Syrian regime. And this is something, as a matter of fact, today, if you look at Iran and what's happening in Iran, you have a huge debate, and you have a lot of things that is in the media speaking, what have we done in Syria? Billions and billions and billions of dollars, and look what's happened now. It's about time not to be involved and just have to some kind of a relationship. And this is why I mentioned fluid. Regarding now building Syria, I can tell you this now. The Chinese today, they are talking, other than Haifa airport, and I don't know what's happening between Haifa, you know, and the Chinese and the Israeli government. But today the Chinese, they have been talking now for some time, and I don't know if they're gonna be speaking, but I have some, you know, advanced notices. They are speaking about Tripoli, the port of Tripoli, you know, because it's a deep sea port, it's a great port, you know, for docking, and the Chinese are looking at Syria. So mainly, I think that if you have some kind of a detente, I don't think United States need to put a lot of money. The Saudi is gonna go in, the Qatar is gonna go in, and this is where I think that wherever Turkish lacks in money, the Qatari will go and will compensate for that. This is the way I view it. Now, I am saying all this. These are all in different direction, but we know how they are moving. Now, the main important point is that the opposition and their action. If the opposition, they are going to have a big coalition and decide on a system that not Islamist 150%, then it is screwed and we are back to square one. If this doesn't happen, you have this potential, and this remains to be seen.
Okay, I think you all agree that the future is pretty uncertain and looks more like a situation of civil war and anarchy rather than harmony and pluralism and obviously democracy, which is not even in the radar. It's not even in the horizon.
This
Yes.
guy, listen, Lewis, I always said about this guy. I know about this guy.
Are you talking
This guy
Jolani?
is very smart,
Yes.
extremely smart, and extremely knowledgeable. You know what I mean? He was in prison in United States. He was with he was with Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. He split. He established Al-Nusra. From Al-Nusra, he established another one, and then he rebranded himself. And he's going with the direction now. I listened to his statement day in, day out. His statement overall is acceptable. And this is why, as a matter of fact, you have a good number of government now. They continued their embassy, work in Syria, really,
Yeah.
except the British and us. So
Robert,
really, I wait myself. I am very careful, very concerned, but I won't say you are going to have war now. You know what I mean?
Robert, look,
I say likely, but it could not happen.
I need to say something about Giuliani. Okay, I was
Yeah. 1
hesitant
minute,
to talk
yes.
about him before, but look, and Robert knows it, and Gadi knows it. Giuliani is a disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah. And those who know Ibn Taymiyyah's ruling about the Alawis, that they are worse than the infidels, should be all killed and whatever, can understand what can happen or not, but what can happen. And why would we say this is not going to happen or is going to happen? We don't know, but we know that he's a disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah, which, by the way, Ibn Taymiyyah was also the predecessor of the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. What is today Saudi Arabia? I mean, not immediately, because it took some centuries later, but they were also disciples of Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, why do I say people like this don't change radically, don't change? And we have the experience of the mullahs in Iran that were surrounded by all these professors, if you remember, Bani Sadr and Yazdi and all the other ones, from American
That's correct.
universities.
I was thinking about it, yes.
And they were supposed to be moderating him. And then we talked about Morsi in Egypt, that he was also surrounded by other people that might have been moderating him and all that. And he did not, and the mullahs did not. Giuliani is the problem. Now, is Giuliani going to be around even in a month or 3 months or 6 months' time? You know what? Let me tell you something. And not as a prediction, God forbid, and not as an insurance agent. But if I was an insurance agent, I would not put money on his head. I would not put money on his head. So all this is so fluid, but you have basic structural issues here that are not going to disappear. And Giuliani is not going to change his doctrine, if indeed he's going to stay. As I said, I'm not sure about that. A guy that is known to be a disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah is not going to be a friend, for example, of the Alawis. And if they will start slaughtering Alawis, it's like the genie out of the bottle, and things can then deteriorate in all kinds of directions.
I think it's a very good point, and I can tell you, Yossi, as a sociologist, and things that we are seeing empirically, it's very difficult to change the mind of a radical. There were very few cases of radicals, even not necessarily Islamists, but even less than Islamists, that actually changed their mind radically. And so I think, yes, we need to be very careful of this new, but on the other hand, it is what it is. And so we have to deal with this new reality, and this time we cannot fall asleep. Remember, October 7th, somebody fell asleep, right? So it's important to keep. So let me ask you the next question, because I think another thing where the three of you actually agree is that Iran actually has been weakened. And Robert was particularly emphasized that. And so my question is, do you really expect Iran's regional influence to decline totally? What about Iran's nuclear program? Lately, we are hearing about the conversations. Apparently, these are reports that the eyes of the Trump administration and Netanyahu are on Iran's nuclear program, and that is going to be next. What do you think about that? Could Iran rush to acquire a nuclear weapon now that its ring of fire has been weakened?
I'll try to answer from Tel Aviv, or near Tel Aviv, if I may.
Yeah, don't say where you are.
Louis, Yossi, and Robert, if it's okay for you.
Of course.
I think that the Iranian regime is in shock since September the 15th. Once the Israeli attack on the page beepers of the Hezbollah was executed, the Iranian entered themselves in a mode of shock. And the fact that Israel killed all the senior members of Hezbollah in such a short period of time make the Iranians to recalculate their policy in the Middle East, asking themselves a very simple questions. What happened to billions of dollars that we invested in Lebanon and in Syria as well? And it simply collapsed. Iran is in a very poor economic situation. And I said this week in one of the radio shows here in Israel, they asked me about Iran, and I said, communities in the Middle East usually look one at each other and they try to imitate success protests or rebellions. And the Iranian people are looking on the Syrians, and they have the will they have the will already from a long time ago to shift the regime in Iran, but they still don't have the political power to do it. So if I am Khamenei or one of his senior consulate, I would say to Khamenei, don't go to Syria anymore. Because if you go to Syria or in Lebanon trying to save Hezbollah again, your people here in Iran may rebel against you. And if you have any sort of money, keep the money for the Iranian people interests and not to the regime. Now, regarding the nuclear program, I don't see them running to the nuclear program, at least until Trump is coming. They will have to talk with Washington, and unlike Syria or Saudi or even Gaza, at this time I see Trump is getting involved with the Iranian as well. And the question is what Trump is going to do with Iran, and has he met with the ruler of North Korea when he was president? I'm not ruling out any possibility that he is going to meet with Khamenei or somebody else from Iran, trying to make any sort of reconciliation. So regarding the Iranian, if I may say, I'm not so pessimistic. Regarding Turkey and Syria, I'm more pessimistic. Thank you.
Okay. You meant North Korea, I think, Gadi.
North Korea, yeah.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah. Well, I have something to say because I know what the Iranians are doing in Lebanon. The Iranian.
By the way,
yes.
I want to take these opportunities to say, if you have questions, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, Steve will monitor that. Go ahead, Robert. I'm sorry.
As a matter of fact, I know exactly, you know what the Iranians are doing in Lebanon. They are more than in shock, and they are on the retreat. And I can tell you this: the Lebanese army now, for the first time, is taking steps, as I mentioned, and I know that for a fact now, is that telling Hezbollah, no, we cannot do like we did before. We have to go ahead by the letter and apply and implement the agreement with Israel. Period. This is now, and you have, as a matter of fact, you have Sunni, even Walid Jumblat, the Druze, has shifted. You know, he was supporting them, supporting Hezbollah and the war. Now he has shifted. You know, and I know from those who are, you know, the advocate of Hezbollah, they are all silenced. Now, regarding Iran and Syria, the Iranian, I mentioned to you, the Iranian lost Syria, really lost Syria. And I think myself, you know, unless you have a huge war in Latakia and Tartus and the Alawi heartland, really, I would like to have some kind of detente. Now, you have to consider one thing: the Alawi in Syria are only 10%. So again, you have to consider, you know, if a war is going to happen. But I don't think the Iranian, they are going to support them. The Iranian now, they are mainly focusing, and you have a lot of actions. I didn't look into it deeply, but you have a lot of things happening now in Iraq. You have the British, you know, high general went to Iraq. You have our CENTCOM leader is in Iraq. You have so many people are in Iraq today as we speak. And mainly, I think this is where Iran is gonna these are the last, you know, proxy of of Khamenei, mainly the Hashd al-Sha'bi, you know, and the Houthi. And this is where I think the focus is going to be, period. Now, regarding the nuclear weapon, I agree with Gadi here, is that I don't think Iran today is going to weaponize its nuclear program. They are smart. They are patient. They are not going to do it now, whether Trump come or not Trump come, because they know that the minute they are going to do it, something's going to happen to them, Israel and United States. And mainly they are going to focus more on missile technologies. This is what I think myself. I think that we are seeing a new page in the Middle East. And I hope the actors on the Middle East, and I hope really, I really hope from Lebanon, really those leaders, those terrible, terrible leaders, they're gonna wake up and say, you know something, we have to do something really right this time. The Syrian, as I mentioned again, a fluid situation. I am not losing hope, although I am saying like you, it's 50% you might have terrible, terrible war.
I need to.
That's a sad story.
Yossi, I'm going.
Right.
1 second. Yossi is very interesting. I mean, based on what they are saying, yes, you don't believe that Iran is going to develop a nuclear weapon, but Iran is Iran, right? It has a genocidal agenda.
Lewis, weaponizing the program,
Yossi,
there is a big difference. Lewis, sorry if I interrupt you. Iranians now, they don't want to weaponize the program. The program is already there and they are going to continue there. But there is a difference between having a program and weaponizing the programs. That's mean to have is nuclear, to put it on a missile and try to fire it. And this is where Israel and United States, I think, Mel, let me speak about United States. This is where United States, it's not going to allow that. And I don't think they're going to do it now. In the future, yes, of course, I agree with you. But now, I don't think they are moving this way. Listen, since when the president of Iran is saying about the Americans, we are friends. We are friends. Yeah. And indeed, he met with Elon Musk. Indeed, you have a lot of discussion. And there is a dynamic here. And this is for Gadi and Josef. The administration, as a matter of fact, Trump, he is pro-Israel. There is no question about it. But now, don't forget, he has good relationship with the Arab Gulf, a lot of interest with the Arab Gulf, and the Arab Gulf today, headed by Saudi Arabia and MBS, they don't want to have any conflict with Iran. So this is where, as a matter of fact, this is where I agree now. I will say Trump now, he's not going to be in a mood to attack Iran. He's going to be in a mood more of saying, listen, let's discuss it. Let's discuss your behavior. Let's discuss what you are doing. And then he'll decide it. But you have the push now. So you have counteracting forces. Israel extremely worried, but also he has to listen to the Saudi. Gadi was right when he said, listen, the first visit was to Saudi Arabia. And I know, you know, you have a lot of interest. And he's going to have one ear to the Israeli, one ear to the Gulf. And thus, as a matter of fact, I don't think you are going to see a war with them. Now,
okay, Yossi, I know you want to say something, but before you say something, I want to ask you something specific. We heard Netanyahu's speech last night, where he basically appeals directly to the Iranian people to indirectly to rebel against the Iranian regime. I don't know whether you want to also comment on that. Comment on the nuclear issue, but if you want to make a comment on the nuclear issue, great, but also on that particular point that I brought. And then, Steve, I know Tony has a question. Yes, go ahead, Yossi.
Luis, I don't like to comment too much on Netanyahu because he likes to talk about what was his speech yesterday, meaningless, completely insignificant speech, you know, PR Netanyahu, typical Netanyahu show for the Iranian people and all that, you know. No, I mean, that's what it was. So I don't even, you know, obviously Israel calls upon the Iranian people to rebel against the regime. No, so what's new about that? You know, look, in response to what Luis and Gadi said, I don't think that I know enough to tell you what the Iranians will weaponize or not, but I am afraid that exactly because they lost so much and exactly because the regime knows that they lost, their sense of paranoia, their sense of self-defense would lead them to intensify the nuclear program rather than to decrease it, if it not for other reason, Exactly because of what Robert said about Trump. In order for Trump to decide that the choice for him would be to attack them or to talk to them, and if you ask me, I agree with Robert. He would prefer to talk to them. Now, I've never been a Trumpist, and therefore I don't need to defend any change of position that I have about him. Two quick other points that were kind of briefly mentioned because it still is about Syria. We tend to forget something about Turkey. There are about 500,000 Alawis in Turkey. And the Turks should be very careful not to allow or not to encourage any slaughter of the Alawis in Syria, because that could cause troubles in Turkey itself, in the Hatay province that used to be once Alexandretta, that was Syrian territory. That's one point. The second point is, and Robert, because he knows so much about Lebanon, who can compete with Robert about Lebanon? Come on, I mean, I'm trying now, Robert, to just say that you mentioned that Jumblat shifted his position. Jumblat always shifts his position on the right time. He did it in 1982, you may recall, when Arafat said, we shall turn Beirut into Stalingrad. And then Jumblat said to him, there is only one difference. Stalingrad is not, it was the Russians, but Beirut is not yours. Go ahead and leave. So Jumblat shifting his position is an indication of change in Lebanon. That I agree with you.
Okay, Steve, there is a question from Tony.
Yes, let me read his question directly. Tony, by the way, is an exec over at Newsmax. He writes, my employer, Newsmax, is reporting this morning the Israeli military, which reports it has destroyed 86% of Syria's air defense system after the fall of Assad, the Assad regime, is saying there is an opportunity to hit Iranian nuclear facilities. His question is, should Israel wait for Trump's inauguration to strike Iran or not?
I'll give you a simple question. Israel should attack Iran. The question is when and how. So it's easier said than done, of course, and it doesn't depend too much on destroying the Syrian system because they were hardly they were really nominal before in many ways, you know. But the question is, what will be the response of the Biden administration? Don't forget, they still have over 30 days. And if you recall Resolution 2334 of January 2017 in the Security Council that Obama did not veto, the Biden administration can do all kinds of things that are also unexpected. And therefore, the question is combination of two elements. That will be a simple answer. Can Israel do it? I believe it can. Should Israel do it? I believe it should. When Israel do it, Israel should do it at a time when they take the least risk of an American reaction. I would say, therefore, it should be around the time of Trump's inauguration.
Thank you. Luis, should we?
Well, at this point, I think we covered pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. There is one question that really strikes me. Do we have time, correct, Steve?
We have a minute. We need 5 minutes. We need 3 minutes to close.
3 minutes. So the question is whether
you have a minute.
I'm going to ask a question that is, and this is related to the article that I wrote for the recent book that Gadi Hitman actually co-edited. What the Syrian phenomenon, the toppling of Assad, is going to what kind of impact is going to have in the rest of the Arab world? Because remember, what the Syrian rebellion actually showed is that the Arab Spring is dormant, is not dead. Just briefly, if you can respond in 1 minute each, and that will be it.
Louis, it depends on the country you are speaking about. In Egypt, the army will go down. In Saudi Arabia, again, and even if Iran, when some people say, well, the people are gonna go, as long as the rulers, they have the determination to kill many people, they will stay in power. And that's the sad part. With Syria, what happened, it didn't happen in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It happened many years. And again, as I mentioned, you know, really the real mover and shaker, other than Turkey supporting this and other than the war, is Israel, what it did to Hezbollah and what it did to the Russians and to the Iranian in Syria.
So it's a very unique case, the case
I
of Syria.
I think, broadly speaking, yes.
Okay, I don't know whether
I'll
Gadi
be-
or Yossi
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to say something.
I'll be very short in my answer here. These are long processes. It's not happening in one day. But if, as Yossi mentioned earlier, Syria is going to be in a chaos, other publics, other people, other population in other Arab states will think twice and third before they try to topple the current regime, because it's better than getting into a new chaos in their own states.
Oh,
Very-
interesting.
Very briefly, the domino theory doesn't work necessarily, even though it may sound logical. There was no domino theory after the Iranian Revolution. There was a fear that, there was no domino theory after the Arab Spring. In the end of the day, what's left of the Arab Spring? 12 or 14 years later, Syria fell. Libya fell already at that time, but Egypt back more or less what it was. I mean, it was Mubarak, it's Sisi now. It's basically the same regime. Look, so it's a question.
Worse.
Yeah, sorry.
It's worst. It's
Yeah,
more
well,
than
okay,
I'm
but
glad now, worst.
the same type of regime, but yeah.
Yeah.
So look, I think that the safest prediction about the Middle East is wait for the better, expect the worst, and be ready for the worst.
On that note,
That's a good note.
Luis, on that note, I'll take over so we can end it. We could go on forever, I'm sure. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming. And of
Thank you.
course,
Thank
I want to extend my gratitude to our panelists. I knew it would be great, and it far exceeded my expectations. So you provided us with a lot to consider. And a special thank you, of course, to Luis, who expertly guided the discussion. And most important to our audience, your engagement is what makes these webinars impactful. Whether you ask questions or not, your participation helped fosters this open exchange of ideas. And we certainly had some really interesting open exchange of ideas. So we invite you to visit palmbeachdemocracy.org to explore more of our work. And if you believe in the importance of our programming, please consider making a donation. And once again, thank you for being part of this important conversation. We hope to see you at future webinars as we continue exploring these critical issues and advancing informed dialogue. And have a great day. Good to see everybody. I wish I could call you out by name, but there are too many. So again, thank you. And for those who celebrate, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much. Shabbat
Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Happy
Take care.
holidays
Thank
to
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Everybody.
Happy
Juma
holidays.
Mubarak.
holidays and-
Juma Mubarak. Today's Friday. Juma Mubarak. Don't forget.
Juma
Okay.
Mubarak. All right.
Juma Mubarak.
And Merry Christmas.
We are going
Amen.
about to make peace, no? Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All the
Bye-bye.
best.
Merry Christmas. We will see each other already next year. I don't think we
Right.
will have another program.
Bye, Sean. Bye, Chris. Good to see you,
Bye.
Chris. Eric, thanks for coming, of course.
Steve.
And
Thanks,
Alan
guys.
and everyone.
Thanks, Louis.
And Bernie, of course. Goodbye. Bye-bye. And Karen, my favorite. Goodbye.
See you.